gotten to be at the table with Wendy a few times, and it's always a really special experience. And Roxana and Bibi, it's a great group here. Roxana was telling this amazing story about Samuel Villatoro, and one of the details that she left out, which I thought you might be interested in, since now you know a little bit about him. And also it gives a sense of the climate of terror here at the time that he was living, is that at some point, and his son Nestor, who's now a grown man and a union organizer here in the United States, following the footsteps of his father, at some point he pulled his son Nestor, who was a teenager, into his bedroom and sat him down and said, "Listen, I want to tell you something. You see this gold crown on my tooth right here? It's on this side, the left side. See that? Anything ever happens to me, you may be able to identify me someday by that crown." And actually Nestor, in fact, and Rosario, his wife, and Sergio, and Samuel, and Claudia, his other children, all were able to identify his remains in part because of the gold crown that he had and had explicitly pointed out to his family before he disappeared. That was the times they lived in. That was the prevalence of state terror at that time. I will talk a little bit about the evidence used in the Diario Militar case because I think it will give you a good sort of concrete sense of how we find evidence and how we use it. But I wanted to talk about an aspect of these human rights trials that have been bubbling up through the Guatemalan system that is kind of wonderful to me, and that is the ways in which these cases, the MAC case, the Diario Militar case, the genocide case, the Dos Herres massacre case, all these cases have, in fact, challenged some of the old style thinking within the human rights community about how human rights justice takes place. One of the old dichotomies embedded in the human rights community for a long, long time was that you would either get to have truth or you would get to have justice. So either you would get, after the end of some terrible period of repression and violence, an opportunity, a cathartic opportunity to speak out in a public or social way through either a truth commission or some other kind of entity, and tell the story of violence and what happened to you. Or, because it was a kind of negotiation with those who were still very much in power, or you would get to have some form of justice, some kind of criminal trial, or perhaps an international trial. And we found out through these cases that that's not actually a dichotomy. These things are complementary, and both are really key elements to what happens after repression ends. The Truth Commission of Guatemala, for example, which was created in 1994, or it was created on paper in 1994 and actually came into existence a few years later when the peace accords were signed, was explicitly prohibited from individualizing responsibility for human rights crimes. So the Truth Commission went into its labors in August of 1997 with a huge handicap, some would say. And a lot of people in the human rights community criticized the ways in which the state influenced the creation of the Truth Commission, and this was allowed to happen. In fact, the Truth Commission in Guatemala, and I dare say this is true for El Salvador, Chile, Argentina, many countries in the region that have experienced and carried out Truth Commissions, was and continues to be an absolutely central part of these criminal prosecutions. And if you at all tuned in to the genocide case that was unfolding over the last month and a half, the Truth Commission, the analysis of the Comisión de Esclarecimiento Histórico de Guatemala provided a conceptual framework as well as a deep historical analysis of the political structures at work in the insurgency, counterinsurgency, that really underpinned almost all of the prosecution arguments. So you could bring in the bones, you could bring in the documents, you could bring in the witnesses, the survivors, the experts. But they were building that case on a deep analysis that was carried out by a truth commission that had no links to the justice system years and years before. So that's one of the old myths. I mean, these myths have began to die a long time ago, but I do like the way these cases have reinforced our understanding of them. Another of the myths that has long ago died, because we now have this concept of complementarity, which is, something that happens in a national court can complement or support something that's happening at an international level, and obviously vice versa. International versus national justice, we've seen, and I would really point to the case of the assassination of Mir Namak as the exemplar of this process. We've seen how an international process of investigation and justice in that framework can help bolster, push, prod, provoke the justice process at the national level, and these are not exclusive activities. And we know that now, and we would sort of roll our eyes and say, of course that's what it is. But actually, when those two cases, when the two cases of genocide were filed originally, one in 1999 in the court in Spain under universal jurisdiction principles, and the other in, I believe, 2000 in the court in Guatemala by a completely different organization in Guatemala, on the basis of the national justice system, there was some tension when those cases were filed between the people who believed in one camp or another that their side was probably the right side, that it was actually better to go the international route, because the national route would never lead to anything. And it was actually much, much better to file the case in the national court, because how else are you going to push the national justice system along and help it improve? Well, we found out in the Mac case first, at the inter-American level, and very much so in the genocide case, how complementary and important both of those processes are. In the Spanish case, just to finish that, the hearings in the Spanish case, although that was filed in 1999, didn't actually begin with witness testimony until 2008, really. There were lots of attempts and trips to Guatemala, but it really didn't get underway until it was 2008 in Madrid in the chambers of the judge Santiago Pedraza allá. And visiting the hearings, present in the hearings, were one of the civil prosecutors, the querellantes, who is now a key figure, key lawyer in the genocide case at home, and one of the investigators that's involved with another organization, also representing the victims in the genocide case. They witnessed the testimony of people like Freddy Picciarelli, talking about the work of the forensic anthropologists. They witnessed testimony from someone, amazing scholar named Marta Caseus, who writes and has written for years about racism in Guatemala. And they came up to us. There was sort of a legal team, but Almudena Bernabeu of Center for Justice and Accountability was really key in putting this all together. They came up to us and said, is there any way we could sort of poach some of your experts for our national trial? And that was really the first time in the genocide case that the Rubicon was crossed. And suddenly we were all speaking to each other and borrowing from each other's strategies and even taking some of each other's witnesses and experts. So that was a wonderful example of that cross-fertilization that long ago, somewhere far away, didn't seem to be possible. And finally, and this will be sort of my segue into a very brief show and tell of some of the documents we used in the Diari Militar case, the difference between bringing a legally well-argumented case with solid evidence as a way of achieving justice versus obtaining the political will at the national level that you need to do that. I saw a piece, an op-ed piece in a newspaper just a couple of days ago about this genocide trial that said something that kind of rubbed me the wrong way. You'll see why immediately. It said something like, the evidence in the genocide case was always around, or there was always evidence for the genocide case. It wasn't hard to find evidence for the genocide. but the political will was really hard to earn. Well, actually, no. The evidence is this like really complex kind of fight on the part of all the parties to go beyond, first of all, the sort of declarative stage, if I can put it that way, the stage of making declarations about what we're doing here. And then getting beyond even the eyewitness testimony stage, also key stage. We've got to have more than testimonies, it's not enough. We have to have official documentation, we have to have bones, we have to have DNA. We have to have mapping, satellite photos, statistical studies of mortality rates. We had all of this in this genocide trial. And it was an amazing thing to watch this case be built from never nothing. It was always built with the collaboration and incredibly hard work of the issue people in this case, of the survivors. But starting from there and going to where the prosecutors brought this case years and years later was a beautiful thing to see. And so I think those are two key elements, obviously, in any good human rights criminal case. Now, last night, my laptop short-circuited. It is dead. And so I had all kinds of lovely pictures to bring you and show you, and I don't have them anymore. They're gone. So Roxana very kindly, quickly loaded onto our USB an old slideshow that I made for the Inter-American Commission when we were still at the commission stage of the Yadiumitar case. I'm not going to really get deeply into what each picture is telling us, but I'm just going to, as I show these pictures, explain that in that case, we started with that document, that incredible document that was smuggled out of Guatemala. And that, you know, with some months of research, we were able to authenticate as a Guatemalan a document of military intelligence. But beginning with the U.S. declassified documents, we found ways to confirm not only the disappearances themselves, but the units that were involved in them. So that's through another source, independent of this Diario Militar that we found. And then, as Roxana pointed out, in 2005, there was the discovery of the police archive, and suddenly we had this wealth of supporting evidence, showing that indeed, not only did these disappearances take place, and they were all laced through the police file as disappearances that had taken place, but that the police and military intelligence indeed were complicit in them. And that's what we brought as a team to the Inter-American Court in last April. And you know, this just gives you a sense of the kinds of things we were trying to show the court. We took pieces out of the Diario Militar. So initially, 1999, the document was given to me. That's all we had. So we start with that. Here's a case in which I used this case to talk about how the Archivo, which was a sort of notorious operational death squad within the military intelligence, was behind many of these disappearances. So we start with what the Diario Militar said, and we show that the dates in it, the places in it, even the time when the man was kidnapped, and what happened to him. In this case, he was killed at that spot as a consequence of the bullet wounds. And how those things are mirrored in this case, a document we found in the police archive 6 years, 7, 8 years later, that down to the street name, the time, every detail of the capture of this individual, which heretofore we had only known through the Diario Militar, was corroborated. And in addition, there are the names of the people who were overseeing this and participating in it, with in this case, a signature. This was interrogation files that mentioned people who later showed up in the Diario to show that many of these people were captured on the basis of torture. This is the person captured on the basis of the torture of another, but his name showed up in his interrogation transcript. Proof that police and military intelligence worked together. You get the idea. I don't think I need to go through it, but really the finding that corroborative evidence in the police files of a leaked document from years before was really a turning point for us, I think. to stop going through those. I will close by saying that despite all the extraordinary work by so many of these, the prosecutors, the investigative teams, the experts, the witnesses, the survivors, in my little tiny corner of all this, which are the documents, echoing what other people have been finding in their corners, the state's refusal to recognize its obligation, first of all, to turn over these documents. If you have a live prosecution, a criminal investigation underway, and they are sitting on documents, not just now, but forever, have been sitting on documents that specifically contain criminal evidence in them. That is simply no se hace, as you say in Spanish. Eso no se hace. And we have to push against this. We have to call this out. Some of the documents we have been able to come up with, Operación Sofía, which has been used in the genocide case, Diario Militar, which is going to be used in this domestic investigation. The general staff orders of the military that show where the officers worked and at what positions they were over the years. The state has refused to recognize their authenticity. The state has refused to release documents, even though they know people, investigative bodies already have them. The Minister of Defense actually issued a decree just I don't know, weeks ago, months ago, saying that some operational military order from 1982 was still secret because it contained pertinent information for today's national security concerns, et cetera, and so forth. I would just say, so I experience this too, just as you guys do. And my question becomes, to close this chat with, when does Guatemala, given its stance towards the Inter-American Court, given its stance towards the domestic prosecutions, given what we're about to hear from the next panel about what happened in the genocide case, when does Guatemala become a rogue state in this? And how do we call Guatemala out on this? Because what is happening at every front is that doors that we saw open for some time are now beginning to close. Ajar, are now closing. And it's very troubling for the state of justice and the work of survivors and the family members, even right now today. All right, thanks very much.